it's like this intersection of resilience, but having fun. Like you fail and that's fun. And the more you learn, that's more fun. And so it's almost like tricking yourself at the beginning. Like every time you fail, like, oh, that's good. That failure was going to happen at some point. So now I'm further along the way. So seeing failure not as like a step backwards, but instead a step ahead. And that really helps to just stay resilient and continue to take no's as like, oh, that was going to happen anyways. Like that's just part of the journey.
Welcome to Open House, where every conversation opens a new perspective. Today we have Mr. Jake Berber, the co-founder and CEO of food tech startup Prefer Coffee. Prefer Coffee was founded as a sustainable and affordable alternative to harvested coffee, which significantly impacted climate change. Now, Jake is also on the 2024 Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Welcome, Jake. Welcome to Open House. And, as a coffee lover, I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. Now, but before we get into Prefer Coffee, I wanted to get to know more about who is Jake Berber and, the man behind Prefer Coffee. Now, you have a very fascinating cultural background. You were born and raised in Texas, America, and you moved to Israel, and now you call Singapore home. Now, could you share a little bit about, how these influences, have shaped your work or your life and, towards Prefer?
I was born and raised in Austin, Texas, youngest of 4 boys, English mother, Irish father. So it was a bit of a unique upbringing in Texas, where it was like a European household, but within Texas. I was always playing tennis with my older brothers. Ended up getting recruited to play at a university in Los Angeles. And that's where I fell in love with science, really, in particular neuroscience. So I finished there at Claremont in 2020, graduated with a neuroscience degree, and then was recruited to join a biotech startup in Tel Aviv. A move out to Israel, mostly out of curiosity of other cultures, and also just to continue to explore what I found so fascinating about science, and in particular how that fit in with startups.
Right.
And then I exited that biotech startup and became a venture capitalist investing in food technology. Along the way, I just started getting much more obsessed about climate change and different ways that we can sort of do our part in fighting climate change, or at least adapting to a changing world. And I found food tech fascinating, creating a more sustainable food and beverage system. And I got the opportunity to come to Singapore because my food tech VC wanted me to come scout for startups here and also finish my MBA at NUS.
Right. And how are you coping with Singapore? Like, do you love it here so far? You've been here for 2 years, right? Since you started Prefer.
Yeah, I love it here. Coming from Israel, which was a lot more chaotic, it's much more organized, and it's a great place to work, and there's a lot of support from the government here. I have some amazing friends, especially founders, and we have an amazing and supportive community as well. So I'm really happy here.
Right. Now, let's get into your journey as an entrepreneur, tech startup entrepreneur. It's very hard. And what motivates you to keep going on this journey for those, who may want to, start on a similar journey? Does money drive you? Does the purpose drive you? Or, how do you keep yourself sustainable on this journey?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to me, like what drives me, it's mostly just about seeing how far we can take this and how much I can personally do and, for lack of a better word, just achieve in this life. Like, what is my boundary of potential? And just like wanting to do everything possible to understand like what that limit is. And then I think from a more impact perspective, I think that we have an incredible opportunity to have actual massive climate impact at scale here. And so to look back on a life and think about climate impact, it's really exciting. So I think selfishly, it's just to sort of test my own boundaries, but really we're able to have a massive worldly impact here.
Right. And why coffee? We've heard of like lab-grown diamonds, and all of that is to support a certain cause. But why coffee, and, why that impact on climate change? If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we wanted to identify crops, food, and beverages that are under the most existential threat of climate change. And so our mission with coffee to start is to ensure that there's always an affordable option for the mass market, so that coffee doesn't become something that can only be afforded by the rich.
Right. Okay. And now we come into Prefer Coffee, the birth and the vision of Prefer Coffee. So tell us about Prefer Coffee. What sparked the idea to innovate within the coffee industry?
Yeah, so when I was working as a venture capitalist investing in this space, food tech, it was just a great excuse to learn as much as possible by speaking to the best founders, coming out with amazing technology and understanding big market trends. And one of the big macro trends that was pretty obvious was the increasing price of coffee due to climate change, impact on growth, and increasing demand. And then I moved to Singapore, and I met a food scientist named DJ, my co-founder, in a startup accelerator called Entrepreneur First. And we aligned on, first of all, our values, what are important to us, family values, things such like that. And then we aligned on trying to find food and beverages that we could use as a lever to fight climate change. That was really the start of it. And then we identified coffee as a huge lever that wasn't being pulled yet. So we basically went into R&D out of his kitchen, how to make coffee flavors from things that aren't coffee. So we had jars fermenting all over the place, like roasting stuff all over his home kitchen stove. And eventually we came out with a product that we were able to showcase to early customers, to some investors. We were able to raise pre-seed funding and basically get into a lab where we could actually get a little bit more serious and controlled in our experiments.
Right. And what values do you think that Prefer Coffee had that stood out from the rest of the investments, to convince your investors to buy into you?
Yeah, I don't think that the values aligns with the investment. For better or worse, a lot of money is put into companies that don't have any values at all. So I don't think that values necessarily leads to investment. But in terms of running a successful company that is also enjoyable, it's really important to have a co-founder that you enjoy spending time with, and you can at least understand their perspective. Even if you don't have the same exact morals and values that they do, at least you can respect it. It's almost like having a child with someone. Like your child is screaming in the middle of the night, someone's got to get up and take care of it. Like, it's just making sure that the child or the company has everything they need all the time and putting yourself second behind.
Right. Now, coming to a question, more on Prefer Coffee, the most important question is, do you love coffee?
I love it. This is coffee. This is coffee everywhere. I drink real coffee. I love coffee. I don't love expensive coffee. And I don't like the idea that coffee could be just for the rich one day. So that's the whole point of Prefer. It's not to disrupt the industry and completely say that coffee is bad in any way. I just want to always make sure there's an affordable option.
Right. So why do you believe that, the traditional coffee production is unsustainable, and how does Prefer bean-free alternative, support these challenges?
Sure. Yeah, it's not a belief. It's more about just data that has been coming out about the CO2 impact of coffee production or coffee cultivation. And not to go too deep into the numbers, but per kilogram, coffee requires more CO2 than chicken, fish, pork, eggs, and milk. And so there's all these alternatives to all those food and beverage that I just mentioned, but to have real impact at scale in food and beverage, coffee is a lever that we need to be pulling. And so while we need to get our life cycle analysis done that will verify how much CO2 we're emitting, it's looking like we're emitting around 5 times less CO2 when compared to traditional coffee beans, which is a huge value proposition for these large, fast-moving consumer good companies that we're looking to collaborate with, because not only are they saving costs on the product, but they're saving their CO2 emissions as well. So it's sort of a win-win.
Win-win situation for these brands. And how has being a food tech startup in Singapore sort of supported that vision for Prefer Coffee as well?
The government's been very supportive of us. There is the 30 by 30 mandate where I believe it's 30% of food and beverage in Singapore must be made in Singapore by 2030. That's a pretty large goal. And we're doing everything that we can to make that happen. So we're building out a large production facility now up in Sunoko in the north of Singapore, where we will increase production quite significantly. And then maybe that even will lead to exporting to the region. So yeah, we're doing all we can, and the government's been very supportive to create more food security here in Singapore.
And you mentioned earlier, when we were talking off camera, that actually Asia is one of the biggest producers of coffee, right? So how does Prefer sort of fit into that narrative as well? Are you hoping to branch out into the rest of Asia as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, we are planning to launch in the Philippines later this year with a coffee chain there. And we have pretty extensive collaboration conversations with large multinational corporations in other places in the region as well. Very interested in what we're up to. And the thing is, coffee is a global beverage. It's not like one region. So while we're starting here, we're also speaking to people in the EU, US. There's other massive markets to tackle, but we're really focused here in Asia to start.
Right. Fantastic. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced, in creating an eco-friendly coffee and yet still appealing to coffee lovers? And I'm speaking as a coffee lover. Like, I start my day before I even get into the office with 3 coffees, but I love black coffee. If I do drink something other than black coffee, it's from the coffee shop, which is, I don't know if you've heard of it, like a 𝙤𝙤𝙚𝙧𝙚𝙧𝙚, like it's with the carnation milk and things like that. So how do you still appeal to the tastes of coffee lovers? And what were some of your initial challenges or challenges that you still face?
Yeah, so I think that initial challenges that we faced with the communication was that we sort of came out hot and we were talking about how horrible coffee is for the climate and how it's getting so expensive. And then we were going to coffee companies and saying, hey, buy our stuff. And they're basically giving us the middle finger and saying, like, you just put down our industry. Like, why would I buy something from you if you don't even like the industry? And then I realized, like, what we were saying actually wasn't what we meant. What our goal and our mission really here is to support coffee companies with more affordable and more sustainable coffee. So now our communication is, hey, don't make a whole new product, but you can actually blend in Prefer, and you can reduce your costs and reduce your carbon footprint, but your end product stays tasting exactly the same. So your customers are still super happy and they'll keep coming back, but you as a business are just in a much more sustainable position for the rising price of coffee coming ahead.
Now, we also mentioned, and I read in a couple of articles before, that you plan to introduce flavors like vanilla, hazelnut, and cacao, right? Cocoa is essentially, and these are actually threatened by climate change. Now, how so? And have you started already, working on that? Yeah.
Short answer is yes, we have, and planning the next product, which will likely be cacao-free chocolate. And we're still figuring out what format we're going to launch it in, but our R&D scientists have been working on that for quite some time now.
Right. And how do you see innovation in food technology, shaping the future of sustainable consumption?
There are 3 things that are super important in sustainable foods doing well. So one is cost. So sustainable foods will not work if it's more expensive. So we need to be innovating to bring costs down. 2 is taste. Consumers don't buy if a product doesn't taste just as good as what they're trying to replace or supplement. So it has to taste just as good, if not better. And 3, it has to be as healthy, if not healthier. So the level of processing and the length of ingredients list, you must be really thoughtful about that when you're trying to replace something that is a natural product.
Right. And what has the market response to Prefer coffees? What has it been like? You started in 2022 and it's been about 2 years plus now. So has there been any shifts in trends? You mentioned earlier that you had to change the way you sort of market the product. It's not that you hate coffee. It's just that it's an alternative ingredient to be used in any of your coffee-based products, right? So has there been any significant changes over the last 2 to 3 years or any developments that you're excited about?
Yeah, a ton. But I think that we're not too worried about the trends going on in coffee. 2 years is a tiny amount of time. 10 years is a tiny amount of time. We're trying to make a business where this is, in 50 years, the default coffee that's in all these CPG brands. So yeah, I don't think that we've seen any trends that would sway us from what our original thesis was 2 years ago when we started, which is we need to make a more affordable product that tastes just like coffee and basically find a way to integrate it with the biggest food and beverage companies in the world.
Right. And, another interesting thing that came to mind, companies like Starbucks and, say Coffee Bean, it started off great with the coffee, but, it became more of a lifestyle product because everyone wants to be seen. I don't know how it is now with the Gen Zs, whether they're still into their Starbucks, but for the millennials, it's like, I'm holding a cup of Starbucks. Is that a channel that you're looking into to target to a particular group of consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. We're focused on the younger younger generation. We're focused on Gen Zs. We're about to launch a canned product. Super excited to share the design for all that, but it's pretty obvious what we're going for.
Right.
We're looking at the younger consumer that haven't yet created their habits yet. So we're looking to sort of make a product where people look back in 20 years and the taste they prefer is nostalgic. That's the taste of their childhood. So yeah, that's basically what we're trying to do today, is really create this new habit of drinking prefer.
And how does that work? Because for Gen Zs, I mean, for the 30 and 40 something year olds, I think alcohol is still a big driver, a part of entertainment. But I think for the Gen Zs, there's this trend where they are actually slowly, moving away from alcohol consumption and getting into cafes and drinking more of coffee. So what particular trends do you see with them per se?
They're looking for things that are fun. They're looking for brands that they can relate to, where the founders are telling the stories and they know the marketing team and they're following them on all the socials and they know what's going on in the lab. They're looking for more transparency from companies about like what's actually this brand is about.
And what's in the product.
Exactly. And even just like the people behind it. So that's what we try to do on socials as well, is just really be transparent about who we are, what's our story, what we stand for. At first, people go to and see, oh, there's Prefer in the supermarket. I've seen those guys on Instagram. Like, I'd love to support them and give it a try. Once they give it a try, they're like, oh, this is really good. And then hopefully we can create those habits.
Right. Fantastic. And how do you educate customers in general, not just the Gen Z, say the Gen Zs, the millennials, or even, not sure if you're baby boomers, but and the Gen X? How do you educate them, about a bean-free alternative?
We actually don't do education. We do more entertainment.
Right.
And luckily, the BBC, CNN, the large media platform, they're talking about how coffee cultivation is under serious threat. And so they're able to communicate at a much larger scale than we can what's going on and help to educate. So we just entertain and make a delicious product, and we really focus on that. But we leave the education to the bigger players, the larger audiences.
All right. So Jake, what has been a surprising hurdle for you that has gone unnoticed, that people outside, your consumers, may not know that, you've had to cross? From
the business perspective, building out manufacturing is just a beast, and we have underestimated how much time it would take to scale up.
You have a site now, right?
Yeah, we do our own manufacturing
Yeah.
in-house. On one side, because we know exactly how to do it and execute it, and we know that we can get to a price basically when we're at scale where it's below the price of the commodity of coffee, and then we can support all these large businesses with more affordable coffee. And also at the same time, this is a whole new product, and so there's no one that can sort of co-manufacture it for us. And there's no one that we can call up and say, hey, will you make bean-free coffee? Because no one really does that. So we have to do it in-house. But we believe that makes our technology more valuable and down the road more acquirable one day, because then we can sort of license our technology to these big players and then take a revenue share from that.
Right. And where do you see Prefer going as a co-founder? Where do you see it going in the next maybe couple of years?
Yeah, we have plans to launch a portfolio of food and beverages that we're supplying to the largest food and beverage companies in the world. So today it's coffee. Tomorrow it could be coffee and chocolate. After that, it could be coffee, chocolate, hazelnut, vanilla, citrus. There's all these food and beverages that are under existential threat. And so we plan to make them in a more affordable and more sustainable way, and then provide that for the biggest food and beverage companies in the world.
Right. And what do you love most about the work that you do with Prefer? Everything.
No.
Everything. No.
There's some parts of the business I don't love, but most of it I really do. I think talking to customers is the best. Putting this in front of people who taste it, who love it, who get it, who want to work together, like that is awesome. And for people who want to do it at scale, that's even more awesome. And then when they start speaking about numbers that are really world-changing things, that's the stuff that keeps me going and fires me up, is to think about how much impact we can have in quite a short amount of time.
And you mentioned that, talking to customers, what are some of the most impactful things that they've shared with you? I mean, having an impact on climate change through coffee, is that right to describe a Prefer? But I think there was a misconception where, people think that you're a coffee company, right? And that works very well with the Gen Zs. But when you speak to a variety of customers and consumers, what is the greatest change you think they want to see?
They are sick of the rising price of coffee. No, it's really about that. And I say that because for large businesses, it's not just expensive, it's actually getting to the point where it's too expensive. I say too expensive because it's now reaching a point where coffee's at a price where the large businesses can no longer purchase it and then resell it at a price where they make margins and the end consumer can still buy it.
Yeah.
They're now having to either price out the mass market or no longer make margins. And so that's where they're coming to us and saying, oh, you could actually create the same flavor, but at a lower cost. That's super interesting to us. And we'd like to integrate your ingredient.
Right. Okay. And now we get into like some leadership and personal insights, because I think as a tech startup, that's where the focus comes in. You and your co-founder, have successfully sort of scaled Prefer Coffee over the last 2 years plus. How does it feel for you personally to sort of witness this growth? And what have you been most excited about?
Yeah, I feel like back to the metaphor of raising Prefer like a child, I feel like a proud father. It's beautiful to see the amount of distribution that we've been able to get with the product and the amount of just people being able to touch it, taste it, enjoy it. That's super rewarding. And then I think internally, just watching the team grow from 2 to 10. As of this week, we're 10 people, and that's just a wild thing. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, team growth is not like a KPI we really strive to. We always try to hire like as late as possible. Just to decrease or keep as lean as possible, but to walk in and then see 9 other people working on this thing that was once just an idea is pretty surreal. So yeah, that's been super rewarding as well.
So when you first started out, it was just yourself and your co-founder.
The two of us started together.
For how long did you do that journey for?
About just under a year, I think.
Under a year.
Yep.
I see. All right. And what is the most significant sacrifice do you feel that you've made throughout this journey?
There's not one that comes to mind, but I think it's just every day, this is my priority. And I see everything through a lens of building this company. And so I wouldn't say I'm like sacrificing one thing in particular, but I know that this is the most important thing to me in the world. And it will be for as long as it takes to make it work.
Do you plan to move into other types of products that impact climate change eventually, maybe?
Yeah, cacao-free chocolate would be next.
Coffee and chocolate.
Yeah, so coffee chocolate to start. And then there's others that we can make using our same technology, same infrastructure. So yeah, that's the really exciting thing about it is we can build up all this infrastructure, but then actually by changing inputs, we can have a bunch of different products coming out of it. So yeah,
it's scalable, basically.
It's very
scalable, right? Now, a question that many would want to hear from entrepreneurs like yourself or tech startup, what is the formula for sort of like developing this winning mindset? Like you mentioned, you and your co-founder had to do lots of experiments and you probably failed a bunch. And then you had to try again, failed a bunch, and you had to keep convincing people of your vision and your idea. So what do you hold on to personally to keep going?
It's like this intersection of resilience, but having fun. Like you fail and that's fun. And then you learn and you try again, you fail again, and that's fun. And the more you learn, that's more fun. And so it's almost like tricking yourself at the beginning. Like every time you fail, like, oh, that's good. That means that failure was going to happen at some point. So now I'm further along the way. So seeing failure not as like a step backwards, but instead a step ahead. And that really helps to just stay resilient and continue to take no's as like, oh, that was going to happen anyways. Like that's just part of the journey. So I mean, that's just something that I always try to keep in mind is trying to have fun and learn from each no. Rather than just let it bring me down. Because I think, and I speak to a lot of founders about this, it seems as though the most common characteristic in a successful founder is just the ability to just get back up and just keep going.
Going.
Yeah, no quit.
Don't quit.
Yeah.
Right. And the caffeine helps as well.
100%. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you have a team now, 10 of you, right? And, what do you look for in your team members or the people that you come into contact with for the business?
Yeah, I think one is true curiosity and the wanting to learn. And 2 is wanting to have fun. And I think that if you combine true curiosity and wanting to learn with having fun, you end up working more because you're having fun and learning. And then when you're learning more, you're progressing faster, and it just creates this awesome path to really quick development.
And what was the hardest thing for you and your co-founder? I mean, initially in the beginning when you had to, he's a food scientist, you're a neuroscientist, but what was the hardest thing that you had to figure out in this journey for Prefer?
Yeah, I think that we're both learning to have a team and manage people. I think that we're both good at what we do. But a big part of the business is making sure everyone on the team is motivated and to keep going. And so I think that's something that we're always asking each other how to improve with our own teams as well. He handles R&D production. I handle sales marketing. So we have each of our folks, but we try to make sure that the things that we're saying are consistent with one another as well. So that's something that we try to be thoughtful about.
And lastly, what advice do you have for anyone coming into the sort of food tech startup business? And, what advice do you have for someone who's also wanting to pursue entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so if you're looking into food tech, I wouldn't recommend starting unless you have something that can innovate on decreasing costs, improving taste, or improving health. If you don't have an innovation that can basically service one of those three needs, then I don't know if there's demand in the market for it. But if you do, then stay resilient and continue to fight on. This is a long game that we're playing. So I commend you if you do start the journey. And generally for entrepreneurship, I think just falling in love with a huge problem and being flexible on the solution that you're willing to make for that problem. But just identifying what is like the biggest problems in the world that you really do care about, and then speaking to customers who may be experiencing these problems, and then trying to understand what solution that you can make. It's rare that you find a very successful business where someone's sleeping and is like, oh, bean-free coffee. Like for me, it was like, oh, okay, I want to really work on climate change. And within climate change, I'm very passionate about food and beverage. And so then started speaking to people in the industry, like what are problems you're having? Coffee's getting more expensive. What are solutions to that? Coffee without coffee beans. But yeah, I think just falling in love with the problem first is super important.
Right. And what would you like to leave the audience with about Prefer?
Yeah, so thanks everyone for listening first and foremost. If you do want to support us and join us on the journey, please do go on our website, prefer.coffee, and just go try it at one of our locations. You can see on the map at the bottom. Tell your friends about us. Just open a conversation like, would you try coffee without coffee beans? What do you think about that? It's usually a pretty entertaining topic. And yeah, appreciate your support. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jake. And, thank you everyone for tuning in. And remember, for every question, there's someone there who's got the answers for you. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might benefit from this discussion. And please go and support Prefer Coffee. I'm going to try it later. So you can also follow us on our social for more updates. Thank you.